You're tuned into the Unnecessary Harm podcast, where we drill down on issues of substance use and its cultural impact. Your host, Shane Varcoe, Executive Director of the Delgado Institute, with over 40 years experience in youth and community work and a passion for building resilience.
Welcome back to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. It's good to have you back with us today. For those joining us for the first time, welcome on board. I hope you enjoy it, and don't forget to subscribe and pass it around. It's awesome. Today's guest is a powerful voice for prevention and hope. Kerryn's journey from a loving upbringing in suburban Melbourne to dabbling with substances for just a bit of fun, on to hospitalisation and near-death scenarios is sobering and deeply relatable, particularly in an era of ever-increasing drug poisonings and overdoses. But her story didn't end with facing death as a result of unnecessary adolescent experimentation, no. After near-fatal substance-induced illness, she turned her pain into purpose, writing Chasing After the Wind and sharing her story in schools, workplaces and community forums across Australia. Kerryn speaks truth to power with raw honesty, no glossing over struggle, but always with hope. Her work is firmly rooted in outcome-based prevention, real stories, real consequences and real solutions. She champions early warning through education, removing stigma and equipping communities with knowledge, not limited to crisis response. She works incessantly to try and stop others sliding into despair, guiding young people and families toward understanding prevention, resilience and real recovery. Kerryn Redpath, welcome to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Lovely to see you.
It took us a bit of time to get here, but we got here, and I'm so glad you've been able to make time in your busy schedule. It's really good. Look, before we get into mining your experience for a lot of the gems that are there, and there are a lot, because you and I have walked together for a couple of decades almost now. So it's
long time now. Yeah.
Our paths cross on a regular basis, which is wonderful. But it's interesting where this kind of episode lands between the two bookends of World Drug Report Day and World Drug Day, or World Day Against Drugs and Illicit Drugs and Trafficking, the ever increasing and ever morphing definition of what used to be called World Drug Day, which I won't go into right now, but there's a game behind that name manipulation. And of course, World Overdose Day, which is kind of in August. And kind of we're in between those two spaces. And it's interesting that the World Drug Report this year, it was... When you remove the gloss and the glamour, it's pretty raw. The data's pretty raw. The global drug trends are quite scary right now. In fact, it's record highs in the world in drug substance use. But now in 2023, we're talking about 316 million people. That's 6% of the global population have used substances in the last 12 months. It may only once or twice, or it could be daily. But that demographic is now using. There's a huge number of people using drugs, and it's growing. And that's what's interesting. It's growing. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that's the case. Of course, cannabis tops the bill. And no surprises here. I mean, permission models rule the roost at the moment in the Western culture. Permission models rule.
Absolutely.
It's simply, you increase the old consumption model. If you increase availability, you increase accessibility, and you increase acceptability, you increase consumption. And of course, the best permission model in play is decriminalisation, then legalisation. The normalisation of drug use is one of the biggest drivers here, and they're surprised at the increase. It's like, I'm sure they are. But of course, amphetamines is growing, cocaine is on the rise, and particularly in Australia, and we're a great destination for that. We won't go into that today. But it's interesting, there are now 64 million people suffering from drug use dependence. 64 million. In fact, the drug-using population, just for the listeners who are into the statistics and data, is now outstripping population growth globally. So this is really an interesting agenda, and we could go down a lot of rabbit holes on this. We've got to be very careful on that today, but it's quite scary. And then it got to the other end of the scale. The other bookend we talked about before was the overdose. And World Overdose Day and what's going on. Australia released a preliminary overdose report, which was always couched with horrific stats, and they are people dying or being hospitalised and seriously harmed by engagement in substance use is always horrific. But they announced the horror, and then they announced following straight away harm reduction is the answer. Well, of course, we've had harm reduction in play, actively, aggressively in play the last 10 years. And we've had permission models and grow in the last 10 years. And we've got increasing drug use and increasing harms of drug use. And no surprise there. I mean, you increase substance use, you increase the harms. And it's like the old definition of insanity is you're repeating the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. But what's really glaringly obvious by its absence is prevention models. In fact, it's almost been erased from the lexicon, the drug policy lexicon, which is quite disturbing. And of course, this is where you and I and the Delgado Institute do our best work and effective work, but it's not given the traction and capacity it's needed. So just wanted to sort of throw that out there. But I know, Kerryn, you've had some not just your own personal experience, but in your work with communities and young people, both personally as well as in your professional context, you've had some pretty horrendous experience with seeing young people end up either severely harmed in hospital or pass away, die, because of engagement, particularly with pharmaceuticals. And I just want to make this clear before we get you to answer that and speak into that space, Kerryn, is that we want to clear up for the uninitiated the term overdose. Now let's be very clear here. You cannot overdose on an illicit substance that has no legal or licit use and licit dose prescription. That's not overdosing, because every dose is an overdose.
Yeah.
Every dose is a poisoning. So those scenarios are poisonings. So when someone says, they overdosed on amphetamines, no, they didn't. They poisoned themselves on amphetamines because there is no dose-related proper prescription for amphetamine. Now, when it comes to misuse of pharmaceuticals in a recreational setting, different animal. Things like, opioids, and particularly methadone, or, what they used to call in America hillbilly heroin, which is various levels of high-end opioids, Panadine crushed up and injected up. So again, these are actually legitimate pharmaceuticals that do have a doctor-initiated prescription model that is prescribed for a particular outcome, and if it's taken within those doctors' prescriptions, it is relatively safe. But of course, that can be retasked and used in a recreational context, and therefore you're taking more than you should do, and that is technically an overdose. So I just want to make that clear to listeners who perhaps are not initiated in this space. And the bad actors in this sector are very good at mixing the two together to make it sound like this is all kind of some sort of horrible accident, that people didn't really mean to do this. When people take an illicit drug that's a poison and deliberately take it for recreational purposes, just for fun, and we're not talking about trauma-informed drug use, that's a different animal today, we won't talk about that today, but for fun, for recreational purposes, then they are literally poisoning themselves for fun. And the outcomes are horrendous. So look, having said that, tell us if you can, again, obviously, privacy is a really important issue here. I know you've got a number of stories and a number of encounters where you've, been able to help people, but also some encounters where the tragedy has already happened and you've had to come in and sort of help with that. Can you share a little bit about that with us, Kerryn?
Unfortunately, overdoses are just so common out there. Like, I've had to resuscitate 3 different people years ago when I was using. I haven't used any drugs, and these were one time it was actually speed. Someone suddenly had seizures and stopped breathing. They had been smoking marijuana as well, but other times it's been opiates. And then there's and when you say that people are poisoning themselves using these drugs, a big part of that is because they're not hearing a prevention type message. Because what we've got out there is these messages that, people should be able to do whatever they like, and we'll try and keep it safe. But as you say, you can never guarantee that these drugs are safe. Different people can respond differently to exactly the same dose of the same drug. So that comes into it too. So I've seen in the past several people overdose. I've seen other people resuscitate them. I had to resuscitate my partner years ago in the middle of the night by myself. It took me 40 minutes to get him breathing, and I actually stopped at one point and stood up and realised he was gone. But in sheer panic, I got back down on my hands and knees and kept giving him mouth to mouth. I didn't know how to do proper CPR, so that was that one. But even more recently, there's been friends of mine who have lost young children to overdose, and it's just so very, very real. Like, I talk about in my school presentations about the ambulance statistics of overdoses in Australia. And actually, I think it was Victoria. And it's massive. It's up near 20,000 overdoses. I just haven't checked that figure recently. And that includes poisonings.
Yes, of course.
And those records are only taken on the ambulance call-outs. It doesn't include the overdoses where people like myself or my partner or others are resuscitating each other and managing to get that person breathing without calling an ambulance. So it just shows how close we're coming so many times to ending our lives, or young people, are older, any age, but by using these, supposed recreational drugs. Yeah. So, yep, I've had a lot of experience, unfortunately, in that. Yeah. Which is one of the reasons I want to try and get people to think about it before they go down that path. Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, I know it's a difficult thing to talk about, and I don't want to labour the point, but I think it is concerning when you've got 16 and 17-year-olds getting their hands on, say, for example, a pharmaceutical like methadone. That's a classic one, which is dispensed in chemists for those who are caught in the tyranny of addiction trying to exit substance use. Well, the agenda with opioid substitute treatments or medically assisted treatments is to help them exit illicit drug use, and then ultimately through various other non-medicated methodologies find their way out of drug use completely. Now, that, of course, that sadly has been hijacked now. But methadone's a classic. We had NA, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, we've had NA in our office. We've sponsored, we gave space for Narcotics Anonymous to run their meetings. They pay their way. They're brilliant. That's part of their mandate and their mantra, to ensure that they take responsibility for everything they do. And we offered the space for free, but they insisted on paying a rental, so we obviously charged them peppercorn rental. Anyway, they were having, people anywhere between 20 years old and 60 years old come into the meetings. And one day this 29-year-old came in. Mid-30s, and he said basically, I've been free from heroin for 16 years, but I've had to come to NA to get off methadone. Yeah, that's concerning. And now the stats around methadone are now becoming problematic. I mean, we know that it has got some success rates, but of course there's should have a sunset clause on it to help people exit drug use completely. But when that sunset clause is removed and methadone becomes the default position, then we swapped out a heroin addiction for a methadone addiction, which has got its own serious issues, and which, again, we won't go into today. So again, the practice of harm reduction has been hijacked by drug use normalisers to sustain drug use, not to exit drug use. But my concern here, and there's that little cameo of mine that I like to throw in, is that when you get a 17-year-old gets their hands on methadone and it's for party purposes, what's some of in your experience, when you talk to young people over the years, Kerryn, what's some of the motivations behind that? A bit of bravado, a bit of it's rarely a. Look, I'm happy for you to talk about the trauma-informed engagement too. 17-year-olds can take up drug use because they're depressed or suicidal, and I get that. But this kind of party thing, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've got a recent situation where, look, I don't want to go into great detail, but a friend's son overdosed on methadone, not a drug addict, just wanted to have a bit of fun. And it was that bravado thing. The mates thought, nah, it's horrible, don't want it. And this one person decided, I could do it, and took it and went to sleep and never woke up. Absolutely devastating the family. And someone was selling it in the first place. The whole methadone system is just horrendous. I've got another first-hand scenario there. My ex-husband was on methadone for many, many years. And let me tell you, it doesn't stop them using heroin. and as you say, so apart from using heroin, it might slightly reduce the amount of heroin they're using, but it, as you say, becomes the new addiction. And then getting off that is trying to jump off it quickly, and they end up back on heroin, trying to come off it, sneak off it, so to speak. So they wean off it gradually. It's unfortunately, it may have started with the intention of helping someone get off heroin, that had just replaced one addiction with another. And I've lived with a lot. I've seen a lot.
We'll talk about that.
There's
We'll
no,
get into that your story there. It's an important journey.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I'll just jump in there because we'll talk about that, Kerryn, because I think this is one of the things about lived and living experience, which has now also been hijacked by some of the actors in the sector.
yeah,
That the stories of and I've done a video series and this has spoken of this even at the UN in Vienna, where we did a side event there. We spoke about the prevention and recovery models. The overlap and the overlay is basically the same principles in reverse, slightly nuanced, but principles in reverse. One's to prevent you from going and one's to help you exit. But it's the same journey, really, of
yeah,
prevention. But it's interesting to note that it's in this where your 12-step programs are vital, and the shared story is not about celebrating drug use and telling horror stories to try and prevent uptake. It's about engaging with a lived and living experience that informs the cognitive process, which is what is very much part of your education program. And that's why it works so well when audiences are engaged by your work.
yeah,
Is because it's not just, you're not just telling a story of, emotional story in a moment. And we know that doesn't work. We know that in any level, very inspirational, whether it's, want to be the best sportsman in the world, 1% of the people listen to the emotional story and it might help them, but they've already got talent anyway. So we know that's not the answer, but pathos is a very powerful addition to excellent ethos and excellent logos in a presentation. We know they all work together well, science, and that's irrefutable. But having said that, the bad actors are keen to prevent that message of prevention, that message of abstinence and recovery from being now heard in the marketplace, and the stories of the continuing drug user to be given air so it can tell people out there, look, you can actually keep using drugs reasonably well, which we now know from the science and the evidence coming out of hospital practices that this is not working. And even out of the latest, I spoke with Danny Shannon a couple of weeks ago on the podcast about the latest survey for injecting drug users in Victoria from one of the big institutes here, and the ongoing drug use and the ongoing devastation that's causing. But so we'll go down that road. We'll talk about that in more depth later on. But tell us, I gave a little bit hint as a start of this. Tell us where your journey into substance use started. You come from your own admission. You come from a really stable, loving, caring middle class, lower middle class family. So what was your first steps into the drug space?
Do you know, I think, one of the things that happened in my life, my parents decided to change my school. When I was established in a government school with, 3 or 4 really best friends who, by the way, didn't ever end up using drugs. And they wanted me to get a better education and sent me to a private school. And I've looked back over the years, and that probably made me really need to fit in because I was the new kid on the block. A lot of those kids went to girls or students went to school from preschool, and here I was in year 10 joining them.
Established relationships,
Yeah, so there's a little bit of just really wanting to fit in, and there's also the risk taking. There's the teenage wanting to break free from your parents and do your own thing, which is really normal. But we also had no prevention drug education. So I had no warnings at all. My education came from my peers who were using drugs. And it just started with a little bit of, smoking cigarettes. It's a bit daring because the parents didn't know, a bit of alcohol. And at one point someone offered me a joint. And I can still remember that feeling of like, yeah, I want to be cool, I want to fit in. And it can be so simple to do that. And for me, that was my journey from a happy, healthy, athletic, good schools, education, all that sort of good friends. But I just wanted to fit in. And that's very common. A lot of people think that most people who have drug problems have trauma. And that is very, very true that many do.
Of course.
But there's a lot that just want to fit into society and what their peers are doing. So that's how it started for me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and again, I think that's quite a common scenario. The social contagion factor is quite powerful. I think, as I've said on this platform,
Absolutely.
The data's getting a little bit dated now, but early, even 10 years ago, the main reason for drug use engagement was first uptake was a friend offered to me and I was curious.
Yeah.
So again, the social contagions are very important. Peer pressure, again, wanting to fit in, finding identity, the rebellion factor, which is now played, it's a card played by many to as more of an excuse to explain a scenario rather than understanding that rebellion doesn't have to be the case of a teenage journey. We talk about reward over rebellion and exploration over experimentation and how they can be diverted. But it's the social contagions that are the key issues. And you mentioned before in your previous school, your peers were not substance engaged. So that peer
No.
setting did not lend you to that agenda, but the new one did. So the social contagions are very powerful. Have you seen that play out in the last 10, 20 years or so with drug eating for you out in schools? How have you seen that play out? How impactful and how powerful is that?
I'm not saying that the government school I went to didn't have any people that got into drugs. I'm sure there were some, but it just so happened that my particular friends never went down that path. And had I stayed there, I probably never would have either. I can't look back and tell you definitely, but that's the way it seemed to be. As far as, look, it's still, I think that, as you call it, the social contagion is one of the most important factors in this, is that, look, even you think about it, as adults, new fashions come in. We want to wear the same clothes. We want to wear new styles, new shoes, the top. It's part of human nature to just want to fit in, to not stand out too much as the odd one out with the wrong clothes or the wrong this. And I think that's just part of who we are. And this is why young people need this sort of education that warns them that there's nothing dangerous about wearing the same, jacket as that person or makeup or whatever else. But there certainly is something very dangerous about using, following that person into using that sort of drug. But yeah, it's shut down. It's shut down. And in fact, I had this sort of revelation a while back that one of the reasons that myself and other people with a real life story have been shut down is because they say it's a scare tactic. Scare tactics don't work. And they're actually using a scare tactic themselves to shut down real life stories. I don't use my stories to scare anyone. I just tell the truth of what can happen, and I intertwine it with information and facts. It's not just a whole bunch of stories. And yet the feedback from students and staff, wherever I might speak, I've spoken in corporate settings as well, has always been that the power of the story is the most impacting part, because it's the reality of what's happening out there and what these drugs can cause. And that's the feedback I get from students all the time. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, look, it's a difficult one. I, as I said before, ethos, pathos, and logos are a powerful combination. Information with a clear guiding principle, a priori principle, for want of a better word, with a lived and living experience example. And as an Indigenous educator said beautifully at a seminar I attended about 2 years ago, she said, I think it's Gemma Cord, I'm sorry if I've butchered that, Gemma Cord. She said, people see people with lived experience as authentic knowledge holders. And that's a very, very powerful scenario. But now that, and you are an authentic knowledge holder, you're not wielding the story. Again, we're labouring this point. You're not wielding the story to get an emotional response.
No.
But you're actually taking people on a journey of science, of evidence. Yeah. And these are some of the outcomes that can happen. And of course, not everyone that uses a substance dies. Not everyone that uses a substance has a bad experience. In fact, a lot of them have good experiences, but in time we know what it does to the body. We know from the science, continued long-term drug use puts you at risk. It certainly does diminish your physiology in all sorts of ways. It puts you at risk to a whole bunch of other scenarios. So all that's true. And any warning sign by the bad actors is now seen as a scare tactic. So, you put a sign up saying, cliff's edge, stand away. Oh, that's a scare tactic. That's just a scare tactic.
Yeah, exactly.
You're stopping people from going to the cliff and having a look over the edge.
That's right.
You're just impeding their free will. I mean, this is the insanity that's now rolled into this. But because the narratives are created and they're reinforced so prolifically by those holding the microphone in the public square, you get this kind of, oh, it can't be that bad. And this is what's happening. So kids are buying from their peers. And of course, if drug use is being systematically normalised.
Yep.
And then it's when the social contagion says, okay, like with alcohol used to be the problem, and it is still a significant problem, although young people have been warned off that. Like to have with tobacco, it's interesting. In the classroom, we can put up a question now: is tobacco more harmful than cannabis? And now, 10 years ago, I got 2 people stand up, and now I get 30 or 40 people stand up.
Yeah.
The tobacco is evil, and it's the worst drug in the world, and marijuana is good. It's medicine. It's okay. It's okay. Let's use it. So again, it's all about how you're being educated. And this is
Can I just add something there? Can I just add something? When I actually talk about my story, I actually pause in that and say to the students, I'm not proud of any of this.
Correct.
If I could turn back the clock and change what I did and take away the heartache and pain that this has caused for me and my family and for my whole life, I'm still impacted physically by the choices I made when I was a teenager. That I would just, if I could turn back the clock, I would do it in a heartbeat. But I'm just sharing the truth in the story and the fact that in the case, in the hope that people will listen and understand some of the reality. So, I try to cover that because I know people think that you're just trying to draw people into a story or that you're trying to scare them off. It's just not like that at all. I'm not at all proud of the fact that I used, because that's what they also say, that you could inadvertently glamorize drug use. And
Correct.
I've asked students several times, does anyone think that would anyone want to use drugs after listening to my sort of story, or have I glamorized drugs at all? It's always no. So it's just lies trying to shut down for some reason prevention. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty with the scenario. Correct. It's about how you wield a particular bit of data. Now we know from the evidence that scare tactics, and there's been some actors unwisely have just gone out and told a series of shocking stories, or they've gone out and told about their motivational speakers who now trade off a dysfunction and now have these pearls of wisdom they dispense. So what the young person can inadvertently pick up from that is, okay, this person went down this road, they messed up, and now they're getting all this attention from telling people not to do it, and they're making money out of this, and they look like heroes. And so that the hero mindset, the scare tactics, we know from the science those two elements in play at the same time don't work. In fact, they can be counterproductive. We have no problem with that scenario, but that data, that evidence is as a standalone for those particular events is fine. But you can't extrapolate that to an education with an authentic knowledge holder sharing good evidence in a classroom setting, developing an ongoing learned experience like an apprenticeship, which is a legitimate, in fact, celebrated model for development and growth and change and learning, and then turn around and say, well, that doesn't work either. So but that's clearly an agenda by certain people who want to normalise drug use. And any mechanism that interferes with normalising drug use, which includes any education that warns against substance use, is an impediment to the agenda of normalisation. So we've got to shut it down. Now, we're bumping into this all the time. Now, not everyone in the public square does this, of course, but there are some pretty bad actors in play, and they are manipulative, and we know some of them. We could name them, we won't. But others that are, I think, just caught up in it. They've been caught up in the new language. It's about creating new language, and even things like stigma, and no one in any reasonable setting is going to use stigma to engage with a substance user. But now we talk about even talk about your story, challenging a scenario which does harm. Oh, that's stigmatising the drug user. So in what
Can
way
I just say also in that those, I'm not going to name anyone either, but
sure.
Some of these people out there who are trying to shut down people with a story, and they're drug educators, they actually tell other people's stories. So they're pretty much doing the same anyway. And yet it's crazy. Yeah, anyway. Yeah. Sorry.
Exactly. So again, the story, the pathos is powerful and it's important and it's harnessed well, which you do well. We do the same. The Institute's been doing this for a long time. It's not the centerpiece of what we do. We're evidence-based and outcome-based educators. So both are important. Yeah. And so we use a lot of science and a lot of evidence, and we support a lot of educators in that process. But I think what's concerning for me is, and it's that the average punter out there mums and dads, even teenagers, they're caught in their own little bubble. It's the talk about social contagions and how to create what we call wheelbarrows. A wheelbarrow is a powerless, empty vessel that's filled by someone else and pushed by someone else. So we all start life. Every single person on the planet, me included, you included, starts life as a wheelbarrow. Or we have no determination over what fills us or what pushes us. But when we become teenagers, that's when the brain starts to kick into new levels and we start to become more architects of our own decision making rather than simply following what's been done for us or done to us. But what's happening now is that we create this bubble of adolescence, which is a 20th century construct, and we've put kids in there and we've fed them consistent memes, cultural nuances that are partly true. They're not completely lies, but they're partly true. And we keep like teenage rebellion is normal, experimentation is normal. These statements are just not only patently false, but they're completely unhelpful. I still remember being at the New South Wales Drug Summit last year, which was there was literally 6 people that we could count on one hand out of the 400 that were in the prevention space. And there was probably another 20 or 30 that weren't. They were just neutral. They were people attending. So you're looking at 350 people out of 400 that were either genuine harm reductionists but lean into that liberal drug space, or pro drug activists, and wanting all sorts of things like everything from legalising drugs through to pill testing through to whatever you want. I still remember talking to a guy. It's interesting, a senior social worker, and this guy was my age. And we were talking about our work, and we had a really good conversation. He was really impressed with what we talked about, right? And in this setting on the in this hall, he said, "Oh, what you're talking about is really important. We should be doing more. We need more prevention. We need this. We need that." And I said, "Yeah." And what are the normalisation messages being inculcated by various actors? And some of the things they're using, the mechanisms they're using to get kids to believe that drug use is normal and that we just need to do it safer. Yeah, that's wrong. Now, this same guy, I'm in another session offline. They were talking about one of the agendas they wanted to get up and running was permanent pill testing or drug checking, right? And this guy, I'm literally three seats away from him. After this great conversation in the room, young people saying, "Yeah, we need this. No, we're going to save lives." And this guy pops up again, talk about social contagions. He wants funding. He goes, "Yeah, kids shouldn't have to pay with their lives just because they want to have a bit of fun." It's like, wow, he's even said that this play could end your life. He's even made that public statement. But then he says, "Oh, we need to set up mechanisms to enable them to engage with the medium that can kill them. But let's try and make it safer." I mean, this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I know. And there's even people in that field who are probably many current drug users. It's just, and they're using. I saw recently they've started to use the term lived experience, but they're using people who are currently using drugs
Correct.
To share and help others to do it safely. And it's like, let's look at them 5 years down the track. They could be dead. They could have destroyed their life because that's the manner of drugs. It's what they do. Yeah. And I know not everybody dies or destroys their lives, but so many people do.
It's just from the science now. I mean, it's ongoing drug use, whether you have a cataclysmic or acute outcome like death.
Yeah.
Or people. You talk about the overdose and now the Narcan regime that's in play, which I have no problem with the Narcan regime. And there were stories floating around, which are not true about Narcan parties. Some we know from the anecdata that exists that some drug dealers offer Narcan as part of their package because they're trying new product, and this may take you out. So they make sure you get your Narcan ready so you can come back. All that sort of stuff is in the space, but more importantly, is harm reduction was always about to be good. It's a good policy. One of the pillar of the national drug strategy was always about helping those caught in the tyranny of addiction exit drug use. It was never, never meant to be about normalising substance use.
No.
And this is what's happening with the new stigma, coercive stigma language, the new what they call stabilisation. We spoke about this with Danny. Danny Shannon, the new term for recovery is called stabilisation. In other words, I'm still using drugs, but I'm using them problematically. Now, a lot of recovery groups are up in arms about this because this is outrageous.
Until they are.
But, yeah, because and then of course you've got the and of course harm reduction now is the default method for every engagement use. So it's no prevention because you've got drug checking, you've got injecting rooms, you've got Narcan, you've got harm reduction education. Again, lived and living experience, all of it pitted to one end. You are going to use drugs. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
And we're going to show you how to do it to minimise the damage, manage the damage. And as you said before, and Kerryn, I want to say this again, after the drug injecting 25-year longevity study, people who are still using drugs after 20 years, their health is deteriorating way ahead of their age limit. We know that. Monash Health came out, I think, 4 years ago, publicly saying, and it was kind of swept under the carpet, saying, stop using. You're taking up hospital beds. 50-year-old heroin users, 55-year-old heroin users have been using for 20 years. Their bodies are the bodies of 80-year-olds, and they're breaking down because this is a poison in their body.
Yeah, and not just the hospital beds, but the cost of it destroys relationships and families and children, and it just destroys. And then the government's paying out more money to separated relationships, to the children that end up with problems and need counselling or end up on drugs themselves or alcohol or whatever. It's just it's destroying the very fabric of society. And then the other side of it is, and I know they're trying to change this, but we're supporting people using drugs are supporting criminals, and even like they've tried in the United States to legalize marijuana, and the problems just got worse and worse and worse. And
Correct.
You just have to look at alcohol's legal, cigarettes are legal, and they're the two of the biggest problems we've had. So
Correct. Trying
to replace the illegal side of the drug trafficking world is it's just never going to work. As you, I remember I've heard you say once before, Shane, then you've got to look, the policing is then got to look after the legal side and the illegal side. Look at the tobacco wars in Victoria, it's that, and tobacco is legal. So, yeah.
Yeah, and this again, we're always dealing with symptoms. That's one of the problems I want the listeners to get their head around. This is a maelstrom, and like all maelstroms, it is loud, it's ferocious, it is intimidating, it is all encompassing. And if you keep looking at the maelstrom, you're going to go, okay, it's always about crisis management, damage management. What can I do? Let's get hospital beds, or we get an injecting room, or so we're doing something, but we never get behind the storm. We never get behind the storm. And one thing about your book that I want to just talk a little bit about that, because you've mentioned about family, about breakup in family. You've mentioned about the health harms. You've experienced all this, and your book. Very good book. And I haven't finished it yet, by the way. It's a good read, but I have a half a dozen books on the go at a time. That's one of my problems. I've got to cover so many bases. But Chasing After the Wind is an exceptional. I think you've won some awards for that too. But
it's the other one I won an award for. But this one is got a lot of information and other people's stories and reality help services. Yeah,
but that's they're getting to that maelstrom thing, is chasing after the wind. Now, you might be chasing it after because you want to be part of the storm, which is quite bizarre, but I get it. But most people are just chasing after the wind because they're trying to harness the storm, stop the storm, slow it down, do whatever. But they don't get behind the storm. So tell us about the reason why you wrote the book, Kerryn.
Well, I really felt that I wanted to be able to leave something. I can't do education forever. I'm getting older, but I'm still passionate about it, and if anyone asks me, I'm going up to Queensland to speak at a meeting in a couple of weeks. But it was just to try and tell my story again and other people's stories, but I brought in information about popular drugs at the time, which is still a lot of them are around, a big one on methamphetamines, a story of a friend's son who took his life because of ice, and it's so common with ice, with methamphetamines. And then his mother's side of the story. But I've also got other information about drugs, help services, and just something to try and help people. I had a police officer recently was on a seminar I was watching, a webinar, and held my book up at the end and said, I think every parent and every young person should read this book. And it just, blew me away. And I've got him to write me a reference since then. So, it's as I said, covering my story starts with how innocent my life was to start with and how easy this is to fall down this path. I might just add, my most recent kidney function test, my full kidney function is 32%. Like, this has affected the whole of my life. A couple of years ago, because of the side effects of all this, I actually had some heart issues and had to have open heart surgery. And that led to pneumonia, sepsis, blood clots, and all this. And it was all the antibiotics they put me on that whacked my kidneys again. I believe perhaps they're picking up a little bit again. I'll have another test in a few weeks' time. But this has affected the whole of my life. The choices I made as a teenager have affected the whole of my life. But I'm a survivor, so I'm also really blessed to have survived. But it's been a journey. I've been sliced from top to bottom. I had cesareans and I had to have the vertical one because first my kidneys failed and I had an emergency, and then the open heart surgery. This is not just telling a horror story. This is the reality of what's happened to my life. And I've turned my life around completely, and I've had some amazing things happen in my life as well, but it has damaged my body and possibly shortened my life. So
Yeah, and I think the miraculous side of that too, and we might talk about that in a moment, but there's some pretty amazing stories there for you. But also as much as you can share, Kerryn, I mean, it's very personal, and I understand that, and I don't want you to step into spaces that make you uncomfortable. But
I'm pretty open about most of it.
Yeah, I know you are, but I still like to give that caveat for those who are listening. Because I don't want to, and we're not here to, put anybody in distressing circumstances for the sake of a podcast. But your personal life too, your long-term, your first marriage fell over because of substance use. Tell us a little bit about, as much as you can, about that journey and your previous husband's inability to exit drug use.
Yeah. So it's interesting that there's a number of different reasons that people use drugs, but two of the most common ones are like me, wanting to fit in and just follow the others and become addicted. And the other side, there are people, of course, who've been through some sort of trauma and find drugs, particularly opiates, but any sort of drugs, some sort of it sort of covers, it blocks, it hides some of the pain. It does not heal it. Yeah. And they find that they're hiding amongst it. And he came from a childhood sort of trauma situation where for him it was a painkiller, whereas for me it was just a bit of fun. But both of us got addicted in the same way. Now, I overcame my addiction simply by nearly dying. I was sick for 6 months before I hit the hospital. When I hit the hospital, I was given less than 2 hours to live with heart and kidney failure. And miraculously, that's another side of my story, I survived. But I was actually in hospital for 5 months. And in that time, I nearly died again. I was the first person in Australia ever to have a drug called interferon. And it made me throw up all my medication. I had massive grand mal seizures, went into a coma, had to be resuscitated. My heart stopped.
Wow.
It was a nightmare 5 months. And so I came out actually tempted a few times to use drugs because my partner or husband and other people around me were still using drugs. But the fact that my body had been left with damaged kidneys, I was on blood pressure medication from the age of 24, I realised that, this could kill me, and that's what stopped me. So it was a thorn in my side that helped me. But his battle just went on and on and on. And as I said, he went through rehab a few times. He went through methadone, and that didn't stop. And the reason I finally, and I believe in marriage, and he wasn't a bad person, and he hated what he was doing.
I understand.
So the reason I finally ended the marriage was, there were other things as well, but I realised I was enabling him. It just suddenly dawned on me. I'm trying my best to try and help him, but here he is in a comfortable home with a wife and children. Why should he stop? And I actually, it's tough love, kicked him out. He boarded with an older lady for a few years and finally turned his whole life around. And that's quite miraculous. And he's actually, so that was the catalyst for him getting better, was the tough love. Yep. He had to hit the bottom. And it's all forgiven. And we talk a lot. We've got 3 children together. And it's the best outcome for him, and it's the best outcome for our kids. I write in my book that there was a point where I was actually so expecting him to overdose and die, because he had overdosed a few times, that I was sort of hoping if he was going to die that he'd die in a car accident, so that or something like that, so it would be a respectable kind of death for his children, rather than them have to live with the shame and the pain of he died of a drug overdose, and didn't love us enough to stop that. But fortunately, it turned around. Yeah, and of course, I didn't want him dead, but I thought he was going to die anyway. Yeah. So it's a horrible position to be in. Yeah. And I also understood his addiction too. So that was a real, double-edged
you're not
sword.
talking. You weren't some sort of model of perfection and higher moral ground that was casting aspersions and judging and down. You were saying, dude, this is messing us up on every level. I've had my epiphany, and I can't keep going, man. You got to stop this for your sake, but more importantly, for your kids, man. And this is the thing that concerns me most about the drug normalisation messaging that's in play, is that we are, according to the International Rights of the Child and the CRC, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, Article 33, that the kids are supposed to be completely protected at all times from every form of drug use engagement, drug use production. And when we have a society, we now laud getting stoned, high, party, wasted, buzzed, or whatever we want to do over the rights of a child. The society's in freefall. It's got some serious
Absolutely.
problems. And the culture that enables that, and I want to go back to your comment, is also culpable. And I think the difficulty when you're a person who's not trying to bail out of a toxic relationship, you're a person that's trying to help someone exit the toxic dynamics that are destroying the family and destroying them. But that enabling, tell us about, and particularly listeners who are out there who are struggling, because, I've spoken about my brother and my parents and my engagement with my brother's substance use. As a parent, as a brother, a sibling, but particularly as a spouse, it's not something that's easy to walk away from. It's just, stuff this, I'm out. I'm going to burn this relationship. It is, I deeply care for this person, but I've got so many things to deal with here. It's not about me trying to make my life easier. I need to enact something to stop me enabling this dysfunction. Tell us about that.
Well, part of the reason for staying, apart from the fact that, he always loved his kids and they loved him. So that was it was a dilemma, but it was also a financial side. For me we're in one house, and this is happening across the world, across this nation in particularly as well. We were in one house with I was working part-time in, raising the kids, and he was working full-time with two sort of incomes. And all of a sudden it means me having to go, if I leave him, to go into a rental as well. So that wasn't the major concern, major factor, but it was something that's in the back of your mind. How can I even do this? How can I survive? There's people in all sorts of abusive relationships that can't see a way out because financially it's going to be just so tough. And it is, in a sense, I was in an abusive relationship, as in it was more psychological because of living with this. I mean, by the grace of God, I think I've stayed relatively sane. And I had a really close friend whose husband was an alcoholic, and we were able to share a lot, which really, really helped carry each other's burdens. So that was really helpful as well. And of course, I'm busy raising my children and struggling a bit physically because of the medication I'm on, makes me tired. My damaged body, even though I'm doing really pretty well, they've all been factors. And of course, I as I said, I believed in marriage. I wanted to see, and he hated what he was doing. He was really, in most ways, apart from the drugs, quite kind to me. So it was very tormenting. And it was, there was a final incident.
It's a tough call, yeah.
Yeah, there was a final incident where I've written about it in my book, so I might as well say he borrowed my car because his old clapped-out van had broken down, and he left a syringe in my car, and my daughter had just started to drive. And that's when I realised this day, oh, my gosh, he's now endangering the family. Because he had hepatitis Hep C, which there's treatments now, but there wasn't then. Yeah. And I just hopped out of the car, walked inside calmly, and I said, what I've just found, and it was poking up right next to the seatbelt clasp with no lid on it. And I said, you're now endangering the family. I'm going out for an hour. When I come back, if you're still here, I'm calling the cops. And that's how it ended. It was like really, I've been coming to this point of realizing I can't do anything. And that was actually the incident that finally ended it. And,
Of course.
and he just packed up and left. And it's horrible. It's horrible trying to make a decision that will suit the whole family, And my daughter actually said, what took you so long, Mum? I thought I was partly
teenage kids, if they're watching this, they're astute, particularly when you've got a scenario where you yourself are working hard. And look, obviously, if hubby's completely abusive and horrible, that's an easy call. But
he wasn't. No,
I know, but that's what I'm saying. But the kids are watching this and they're seeing a mum working hard to deal with the same issues a dad's dealing with, but managing to do it for the kids. And again, it's this whole others-focused agenda. It's the neighbour, loving my neighbour more than myself. And in the drug-using space, that's out the window. That is just gone.
The other side of that, though, is that we tried to hide it from them as much as possible.
Of course you did.
It wasn't something that I mean, obviously they heard some arguments sometimes, but and even at one incident where he rode off my car because he'd taken something, I went through and cleared the house before I let them in, and I missed a syringe and my daughter found it. I tried to cover everything because it's just so horrible for them to have to try and deal with, because this was their dad who actually loved them. So, very tormenting. But anyway.
Goes back to the rights of the child, the CRC. They're not supposed to be exposed to any of this. Yeah. And you're doing the right thing to trying to keep your kids away from that. And look, Kerryn, I think before we finish up, we've been nearly talking for an hour. It's been great. Yeah. But before we round out today, I know you're speaking at an event in Queensland. You mentioned that, so it's great news. And we're not here to promote your book or here to promote your webinars and your seminars. That's not what we're here to do. But I know you're a genuine, authentic knowledge holder, and I really think that your journey, not just your story, but I think your journey has weight in both the cognitive and affective domains of alcohol and other drug education. And when just on a positive note, just tell us a couple of the really key moments of, sure, you've got some great endorsements, the policeman holding up your book. That's just wonderful. You can't buy that kind of publicity.
Yeah. I was shocked.
Yeah, exactly. So, but tell us some of the stories of young people, that because of the engagement with you, have either, decided, well, I'm really I'm going to delay uptake. And again, that's, if we can't deny uptake, we want to delay it, and of course, the developing brain now for males, arguably, according to the science, is up to 32, but the average is about 28. So, you want to delay, you want to take a drug, wait till you're 28, then start if you really need to.
Well, there's a really big thing about the brain being mature and the amount of damage that's caused. Correct. It can cause it later on, particularly in an immature brain. Yeah.
But tell us some of that, just to close out, a couple of the.
Well, basically, I've got feedback from school presentations. That's where I connect with young people. I've spoken in other youth groups and things as well. At question time, it's quite interesting. Some of the most common questions are, how did it affect your family? How did it affect you? What are your children? They want to know the human side because that's what they're relating to in a story like this. And as I said, I'm not, as we've already discussed, I'm not just trying to share horror stories. This is absolute reality that's affected the whole of my life, my partner's life. And look, I've helped people go into rehab. I've taken a friend's daughter into a psych ward because of marijuana. Her life's been destroyed because of that. She's now got the schizophrenia and all sorts of issues, children taken off her. It's just, and this is very current. And it's gone back from years that I first took her in. But I see these things in people's children either suiciding or overdosing or just life totally destroyed. Like, one friend's son got into ice or methamphetamine and lost his family, his marriage, his home. He's living, on the streets. It's like, unbelievable, the damage and the carnage, not to mention things like do you know when we spoke at that UN meeting in the city one time, Shane? You were there too, and I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone said at the meeting in our little group, because we broke into different groups, and they said, "Oh, we should tell others about how well we're all doing with all these different people from different backgrounds." And I said, "But what difference is it making on the ground if we're just talking and having meetings? We need to be really telling the truth about this so people learn and prevent some of it happening." I said, every day, every time, particularly that was happening a lot then, that you see someone driving down the wrong side of the road and slam into a car, more recently at that time, it was a couple of years ago, you'll find out that it's the driver's on ice. And they often have this voice in their head telling them to kill someone. This is, like the Burke Street massacre, with James Gargasoulis. And it's really common. The very next day, a tradie, and sadly, ICE is very big among tradies. Not all of them. There's some wonderful tradies out there.
I understand. Yep.
Was driving down the wrong side of the road, just down the road from my place, and slammed into a car going on the wrong side of the road and killing a young mother. And that was the road that my daughter drove to her business that she runs. She's got her own hairdressing salon, and she drove down that road every day to work. And it just freaked me out. Like it was what I'd spoken the day before, and it happened the very. This is the sort of thing that's happening out there. So, and it's reality. Yeah.
And so the kids, the young people, you can just tying back into that. They're really concerned about, because the young body is bulletproof. I can do this. We all. I can still remember when I was a teenager. That was many moons ago. But it's like, you're invincible, you're bulletproof, all that kind of stuff. But I also had some clear parameters in my world. I had a belief system that was solid. That meant I didn't need to jump into experimentation. But I also had a wisdom that came from that enabled me to go, you know what are the bigger ramifications? It's not just, can I get a jolly and can I get away with it? But it's like, what are the ongoing ramifications? And those questions from those kids about how does it affect my family, my relationships, that's where they're hurting. And I think one of the things about education that's missing in this space, and the very thing that the bad actors are trying to shut down, is a real engagement with that narrative. That this is really a community and familial damaging scenario. My peers are being devastated. My family's being devastated. Yet we're told this is normal. We're told, here's a syringe. Here's an injecting facility. Here's Narcan. Here's a pill testing. Here's all the stuff you need to keep experimenting, keep using.
Just getting chills thinking
just
about
don't die while you do it, please.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the narrative that they're buying into. So kids are picking up on that language. But when they hear someone like you or like us, they go, we need to hear this. We need to understand that this is not just about me having a moment at a rock festival or whatever, or at a party. This is about, these are life decisions and ripple impacts. And just tell us one really positive story before, because we've said a lot of negative ones, really before we go today. What's one really wonderful story that you can share with us?
Oh, one story. Well, there's so many things. I just want to add that I actually, in my message, I bring a resilience message into the end of it and talk about having a dream and a hope and a plan for the future. And plans can even change. It doesn't matter. But having something, because if you don't have some sort of plan or goals or aim for your life, it's so easy to just drift. And drifters slip into drugs and alcohol and partying so easily. Look, along the way, I actually did find a faith in God. And it's actually given me something outside of myself to lean on. And so many people with addictions of all kinds find that having some sort of faith, you've lent on your own strength and you've failed big time, and you realise you can't. And to me, that's probably the biggest positive out of my whole journey. It doesn't mean your life becomes perfect. But for me, that's been the light of hope in the whole thing. Yeah. And the fact, and my 3 beautiful children, like I had emergency cesarean. They were all delivered early. It was touch and go with my first one.
And mum was a drug user, which is, Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's been all of this, but it's been, and none of my kids use drugs because
Yeah.
they grew up with a dad battling it. Even though we hid it as much as we could, they know that destroyed the family, and they know my story, which I didn't tell them until they were old enough, of course.
Of course.
But you know
Of
what?
course.
They've all drunk alcohol. Why? Because
Yeah.
it's legal. You know,
That's
like
right.
this is the thing. And a couple of times, two of them in particular one of them got way too drunk, and I've got a horror story about one of them. So
Yeah. I'll go to that
this
later
is the
today.
thing. Legalization is not it's just about making money, and it's not the way to go. So
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
No, look, thanks for sharing that. And I think it's important. I mean, when you come to 12-step programs, and of course now the science is in on the 12-step programs, they are still one of the most successful and one of the original drug use exiting platforms in play that restore not only individuals but families as a result. And you've got other agencies around those. And the 12-step
But the 12 steps are great. Yeah.
12-step program in the therapeutic communities are incredibly helpful. And of course, having the higher power is a key issue in all of that. And in Dr. Carl Jung, the famous psychotherapist, he even brought into that narrative, and that became a touchstone for what he did in his work. Not a common knowledge to most people, but a very powerful reality for him. Kerryn Redpath, thank you so much for joining with us on the Unnecessary Harm podcast. It's been a pleasure. We got a little bit of your story. For those who want to know a little bit more about Kerryn, she's online. As you'll see from our podcast, we send out the links to this. And her book, of course, Chasing After the Wind, is a really important document and has many endorsements. And I encourage you to get a copy and read it. It's a must read, I think, for all families. It really is. In an era.
It's on Amazon Kindle as well as, through me.
Sure,
Yeah.
On all the book spaces. You'll find it online everywhere, pretty much.
Yep.
Just type it in and you'll get it. Again, look, thanks for joining us again this session on the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Looking forward to having you again next time, our listeners and our subscribers, but those who are chiming in. And until then, avoid the unnecessary harm as best you can and make smarter choices. Until then, bye.
Thank you, Shane.
As we wrap up today's session, remember, each step towards understanding is a step away from unnecessary harm. We're here to empower, inspire, and pave the way for optimal well-being. Stay resilient, stay informed, and continue being the change your community needs. Thank you for joining us at the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Until next time, take care and keep pushing forward.